So Ryan's a longtime MuleSoft professional. He's the CTO of Integration Quest and a MuleSoft certified trainer. He's been in the industry for about 25 years and is excited to start talking about Maven with you guys. If you have any questions during the study group, you can always ask them in chat, and we'll try to answer them as quick as possible. All right.
Did you do the what are they? The one where we say if your mom told you with the code of conduct thing?
Yeah, if your mom and dad would have told you not to do it, then don't do it.
Yes. When we have larger study groups, once in a while, people will cut up, and if you guys cut up, just keep it about Maven, right?
Right.
or MuleSoft or something like that.
That's right.
I'm not saying you can't cut up, but I mean it's a study group, right? It's not a class, so we can be a little dynamic. We can go a little off track. Once in a while, I do that. But, okay, what else is there?
I think I'll hand it over to you, Ryan.
All right. Do I need to share? Let's do that. Well, now I can't see you guys. I want to be able to see you guys too, so I'm going to change my slides around a little bit so I can do that. Goes like this. Boom. Okay, cool. All right, I repurposed some of our actual class content for this one, but it is completely fresh for you guys. Oh, Caston still got the library of integration quest stuff. Yeah, so this Maven thing is going to be on our YouTube channel with all of our other stuff. So if you cut up, it will be available for posterity for all of the later viewers to see. So I am going to take over sharing now, Caston, since you put that up. So you're on record, guys, for sure. Oh, that's not what you wanted to see. I got a few things on here. Let me get this up here. PowerPoint. Yeah. Apache Maven is something you have to use if you're building MuleSoft code. Not for the API part of the platform. This is for the apps, for the code. Now, Apache Maven is not a MuleSoft invention. Apache Maven is an open source tool that was released into the Java community in 2001, which I want to bring you back because I was part of that. It's not when it was going on, it didn't seem like a long time ago, right? So there's a long history of build tools in software. Maven invented something new that is now part of most software stacks. So before Maven in the Java world, we used a very popular tool called Apache Ant. And I know I've on the side at a conference talked to you, Tony, about Apache Ant. So I know I'm not the only one in the whole MuleSoft community who has done some Apache Ant. Ant was fundamentally different than Maven because it was a fancy scripting tool. Jelly was like that, and Maven and Jelly came out at the same time, and you've never heard of Jelly for a good reason. Ant was inspired by C makefiles. And C makefiles are there instead of scripts because a makefile doesn't have to go in order. It does this thing called like dependency resolution. So I got a bunch of different tasks that have to get done, but task 2, this one task can't start until this other task is finished, right? So you have to have these dependencies between steps in your build. So like I can't move the code into another directory until the code is finished being compiled, right? So there's a step for move the code and there's another step for compiling the code, and you set up a step dependency in there that says step move can't run until step compile is done. And Apache Ant builds were like that. You would write all your steps and you would decide which ones depend on which ones, and they were kind of fragile, and it ended up being the kind of work that a very small number of developers ended up working on, and it was easy to get wrong. And so you get these build engineers. Nowadays we call them DevOps engineers. They were just called build engineers back then, who were really like good at Apache Ant and Maven. And a guy named Jason Van Zyl was working on another way to do it besides Ant, where he said, we don't each need to invent our own list of steps. Come on, it's Java code. You're going to compile it, right? Then you're going to put it in a jar file, and that's it. And we don't need to have all these different ways that the project build works. We can have one project builds one jar file. And you will not believe how much arguing there was about that. There was a lot of people who never wanted to use Maven when it was first released because it had this rule that you could only make one jar file for one project. You couldn't make 6 different jar files and combine them into a WAR file and deploy them to WebSphere. It was like, nope. If you want to do that, make a different Maven project. Maven imposed its opinions on users. It's like, you don't have to use Maven, but if you want to, you need to organize your project in a certain way. So in Mule, you've got this SRC directory. SRC main Mule. You can't just change that. Like if you wanted to have, you can, but Maven has convention over configuration. So Maven is built to just have the folders have certain names. And there's nothing magical about those names, right? It could have been source with, spelled out, SOURCE or SRC, right? Who cares? But what Jason Van Zyl and the Bob and the rest of the Maven, the guys who started the Maven project to say, let's just pick one and everybody use that. And let's just pick an order of the stages and everybody use that, right? And if you don't want to, fine, you can keep using Ant, right? But we're going to make Maven. And they started another, because Apache, where Maven lives now, was a slow process for releasing a new open source project. You have to go through an incubator. You have to get the board approval because it's a nonprofit foundation. So it didn't start at Apache. It started at Codehouse, where Bob just made an IRC server and everybody joined, and he made a website of his own, and Maven got started. And what that meant is at the very beginning of Maven, that small group of people who wanted to pick a way for it to work got to make all the rules because they didn't have to go through any government like Apache. They didn't have to go through a very long drawn out agreement process with all the Java developers in the world. They just kind of got on an IRC server, made the plans. Let's go have an HTTP based repository, and we're going to do things that way, right? And you still can now override the paths. Tony put in the chat, legacy Ant projects, when you convert to Maven, you could still configure and override the paths. You could do that, but what you couldn't do is have 2 paths. So a bunch of Ant projects would have like one folder for a little library that it was going to build a jar file, and then another folder for the rest of the code that was going to use that jar file. And you can't do that in Maven because they said, nope, make a different Maven project then for that first jar file. And that made people grumpy, right? Apparently Maven won, because what Maven did was they didn't just make a tool for building stuff. They made a website for distributing the jar files, and pretty early on had to deal with the problem of malware. Right? If you're going to have a place on the web where you're distributing libraries for everybody else to download, you need some way to know that you're not getting hacked, right? So they had to make a way to do these signatures with digest. And somebody got, and I don't think it was Jason, somebody involved in it was pretty good at cryptography and knew how to make it so that you could have cryptographic signatures way early in the process, which if any of you have done any crypto work, it's almost always an incredible chore that makes everybody annoyed. When you try to build cryptography into any other work that you're trying to get something done, but hang on, slow down. You can't finish until you stop and generate a key and find your password and sign something. Security is extremely inconvenient, right? So the Maven people decided, because they could, that we were going to have cryptography in the distribution of software. And I'm going to show you all the techie stuff after I get past the target slide. But I want you to have a basic picture of what Maven is, and it's a way for us to make software and share it with each other, right? Without a central government, right? It's like the internet. Like I'm going to make software and I want you to use it. You're going to make software, you want me to use it. Where can we put it so that I know I'm not getting somebody else's hacked version of Tony's library? I want the real thing from Tony. Well, Tony can sign it with his digital signature, and I know it came from Tony. That doesn't tell me Tony's not a hacker. Are you a hacker, Tony? I keep picking on you because you're chatting, right? Or Evan or Barra. Well, you guys could be hackers, right? But as long as you never hacked me before, seems like if you release another library with your name on it, probably you're still not a hacker. So people build up a community reputation and you trust them over time. Cryptography doesn't tell you that a jar file is safe. It just tells you that it came from somebody, right? That guy made it, so maybe it's safe, probably, unless his machine has malware on it, right? So Maven gave an infrastructure for us to build consistent Java binaries and put them on the internet so we could get them from each other and build more Java libraries out. I mean, Java is a little famous for that. You ever see the class path on one of your MuleSoft projects? Thousands of jar files. Yeah. So it's it's certainly, because the tooling may have caused the Java community to become a little happy about making too many little jar files. Not as bad as JavaScript, by the way. They did worse than we did. But anyway, Apache Maven created this notion that I'm going to kind of show you the mechanics of it in this slide deck of how do I make my project be a normal project and produce a normal output with a normal series of steps, right? And in this case, MuleSoft used it for our project. So first, I guess what you got to do is install it. So Maven's an open source Java tool, right? And the way that they approach the problem is first build automation. I need a way to do my build the same over and over again. I'm going to have my project organized the same all the time. And the order of steps that the build follows is going to be the same for everybody, right? We're going to set some basics, right? And that's kind of a lot to be the same all the time, by the way, right? So that's why it was uncomfortable for the whole Java community 20 years ago. It took time for people to come over to Maven. The Groovy people never came over, but their whole language. Anybody know what Groovy has a alternative to Maven? Put it in the chat. Anybody knows what the Groovy side of the house decided? We don't like Maven. We're going to use this other thing. You guys know what that is? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Barra got it. Gradle, right? We're like, we don't like Maven. We're going to use Gradle. Gradle kind of died in the regular enterprise Java world, but you know where it lived? Android. It's crazy. Like, yep, Barra, right. So you don't even build your applications in Groovy on Android, but for some reason, the whole Android stack and Kotlin and all that stuff decided on the Gradle path, which I am not a Gradle person, so I'm not sure I can make the case that Gradle's better than the Gradle people think it's better than Maven, right? And honestly, Maven POM files are kind of ugly. We're going to see that. So Gradle files are not. They're very, very elegant and pretty. They're real code, right? They're not a separate XML thing. Maven was started in 2001. XML was hot. So everything in Maven is XML as a historical thing, right? Yeah, Ant and Ivy's still around. Ivy is an add-on to Ant, Tony. When the Ant people wanted to take advantage of one good part of Maven, which is the dependency distribution, so they made this Ant plugin called Ivy, which made Ant live longer. I don't know if anybody, I haven't seen it on anything, but it is certainly another way to solve the problem. But Gradle is alive and well being used in the Android community. Maven is in the Java community, and then there's this one weird side thing. I don't know if anybody likes it; they're going to be mad. I called it that, called SBT for the Scala community, which they're like this weird section of the Java community that does that has their own build tool because they wanted to write it in Scala, right? Anyway, Mule is just not. Mule has a part in Scala, the data weave part, but it doesn't use SBT. It uses Maven. So what does that mean to us is all of our projects are going to build stuff according to a standard process, right? And all of our projects are going to have the files organized in a standard way, and they're going to use a standard tool, Maven, to accomplish the build, right? And it's an open source tool that you have to download from some other place because it's not, I mean, it's in Anypoint Studio and Anypoint Code Builder. It's included with those, but usually you download it and build it separately for yourself if you're going to do any work on Maven. So you're going to install it yourself. Now, a lot of muleys don't. So here's how you do it. Basically, on all the platforms, what I put on my slide is my favorite way to do it. So on the left side of the slide is what I do. Every platform I build, whether I'm on a Windows machine or a Linux machine or a Mac, I download my own Maven, I unzip it, I set my paths, and I run it. Kind of the conventional classic way of running Java programs. right? Now, there are package manager ways to install Maven, and I know very successful Mule professionals that use the package managers, so I'm not telling you not to. I just have been annoyed at them enough times I always just download my own. So it's not that hard to run it yourself with a download, and maybe I'm old and you want to do it the package manager way, and that's fine. So I'm not saying my way is right. It just works for me, right? I have these standard places I put Maven when I download it, put it on my path, run it from the command line. I mean, really, I tried to show it's only 5 steps. It's not that hard. But package managers are fine. Homebrew or Choco or APT or something like that. Go ahead and install Maven that way. The main thing is you're installing this tool called Maven that can be run from the command line on your system, which is going to be separate than the one Anypoint Studio or Anypoint Code Builder are running. Those are going to be downloaded and included with those tools. And now you can run Maven. Now, whether you run it that version or the one embedded in Anypoint Studio, there's going to be a use of a POM file. So every project has a file. It's an XML file. This is what the Gradle folks took issue with. At the root of your project, and it describes your project. This is like your project's driver's license. This is my name. The name of the project is coordinates, group ID, artifact ID, and then version. So the real name of it is the group ID and the artifact ID. So there's 2 instead of 1. Why? Because I might want to have a utilities library, and you might want to have a utilities library, and they're not the same thing. I don't actually want to have one. I don't think you should have very general named software, but people do have utils, right? Useful stuff.jar. But whatever you called it, it could be something like maybe I have a Redis connector and you have a Redis connector, and they're not the same, right? So you need a group ID as like a namespace. And so when you make a project, you're at the top, you're going to, in your XML file, you're going to define group ID, artifact ID, and then a version has to follow a very standard pattern I'm going to show you later. So as you do new enhancements to your project, you're going to make new version numbers, but you're going to keep the same group ID and artifact ID. And that way, whatever you publish for other people, they can find it and they can see what the latest version is. It's a pretty smart way to do it, right? Okay, so group ID and artifact ID. Group ID has to be globally registered if you want to distribute your stuff to the rest of the world. There's a company, Sonatype, where Jason Van Zyl started it, where you register your group ID. I have 7 or 8 on there right now. So you can go get one. You just have to look up how to do it, go through the process and sign up, and then you might have to do some DNS verification or something. So the group ID is generally a pattern in the Java world that's like your domain name backwards. So if you work at brown.edu, it would be edu.brown, and they would go check and see if it matches your DNS, and then you can be in charge of that. And then anything under that, you can do edu.brown.mule, edu.brown.mule.connectors. You figure out how you want to organize underneath your domain, right? And that's how you make a group ID. MuleSoft had a different idea. MuleSoft was like, I know the Maven people have this group ID standard. We're just going to make up our own. We'll get to see that in a minute, right? Artifact ID is just your actual project. The artifact ID is what is this project that I'm making right now. So like my Azure Service Bus System API or my SFDC Commerce Cloud System API or something like that. That would be a artifact ID. And then the version is the latest one that you made. POMs can have a parent. So there's a little block at the top of the POM where you can refer to another GAV, another group ID, artifact ID version as the parent of this POM. And it's kind of like inheritance. It'll take the parent POM and then overlay your POM on top of it, the XML structure. And anything that's duplicated, your project wins, right? So it's kind of like take the parent POM and then lay over your project, and then your project POM is on top of that. So if you have a lot of projects, it's a way to kind of centralize some of the settings that would go in all your projects. So if you don't have a lot of projects, you do not need a parent POM. It's not like everybody should have a parent POM. One of our MuleSoft classes is written as though that's the right way to do it. I'm being a little more gentle about it. It's just a way of maintaining a large quantity of projects in a sane way. So you can make a parent POM and have a bunch of settings that all the other projects work. It can also be a way to like allow a team to change certain things and not other things about the build, because some parts of it you put in the parent POM and then the child POMs don't have that in them. And then in your POM, you specify dependencies, which is different than a parent POM. A dependency would be some other library that your project needs to build. So it should get downloaded when you're running the build. It's something that needs to go get discovered and downloaded and put on your machine so that it can be loaded when you're building or running your project. So dependencies is the problem, like one of the big problems Maven was solving when they made the project 25 years ago. How do we do dependencies that scale across the earth? And they came up with the best way to do it, and it's been copied. So that's what NPM does. That's what Docker Hub does. I don't know exactly if requirements.txt in Python works that way, but quite a few other languages took the way Maven does it and they copied it and they made their own. It's just like it. Where you got dependencies that are specified by logical identifiers, group ID, artifact ID, version, rather than by some kind of URL or path or something like that. That's the wisdom of it. And then you can make reusable settings for the build to run using properties, and I'll show that at the end in case you want to have a external value like a password or something not in your POM file, and then it can be kind of stuck in during the build process with properties. So there's two ways. There's another layer. There's parent POMs, and then there's another layer called settings. So Maven has settings.xml that lives in two different places on your computer, not in your project, because there may be a directory on your machine you want to use to put all your builds in it or something like that. So settings.xml, it might also be passwords that you want to connect to Maven repositories with or something like that. You want settings.xml for anything that's about you, the developer, or your system that you're developing on, and not about the project itself. So you have a global settings.xml that's installed with Maven. Mostly, I don't mess with that one. And then there's a user settings.xml, which is under your home directory .m2, and that's where I mostly put what I need, is in settings.xml. And then there's in Anypoint Studio. I don't know about Code Builder. I think also Code Builder, but definitely Anypoint Studio. There's a place where you can tell it if it should use your settings.xml or not, because you might have settings.xml on there that conflicts with MuleSoft stuff. So they give you kind of a flag to choose. But if you don't tell Maven not to, it will just use these values. And that's overridable, of course. So things that your MuleSoft team might have in your settings.xml might be servers definition, and that's where you might put your connected app client ID and secret so that you can log into Anypoint Exchange. You might put mirrors there if you wanted to have a corporate proxy if you're a bigger shop. I'll show what that means. We're going to have another slide where I show corporate proxies. And then you can also set up profiles, which I use a lot in connector development, so that I can have a group of settings that's only used when I'm developing a connector and not all the time. So profiles are like little blocks of config that can be enabled or disabled based on what you're up to this time, instead of like just blanket all the time. So Asuma says, in case of MuleSoft, for the group ID, do we go with org level or environment level group ID? Always getting confused with this when I work with pom.xml. I think I'm going to have the MuleSoft group ID thing come up. I might have deleted that slide. I'll just answer it now. So the group ID has to do with I do talk about it. It's the Exchange repository. So let me hold that answer until we get to the Exchange repository. MuleSoft has a special type of repository that makes us have to use a different group ID value, which is what Suma's asking about. So I'll do that once I get up there. We got to talk about repositories and plugins first. So plugins is how Maven becomes capable of doing things that are not in the core project. And actually, Maven is a very, very, extreme microkernel design, like Linux and like Mule Core. There's not that much in Maven. Almost everything Maven does, it does through the use of plugins. So what a plugin does is a plugin provides actual tangible steps that need to be accomplished as a part of a build phase. So what is in Maven Core is this list of phases. I have a very small list of phases coming up here, right? So it turns out the list of phases is like dozens and dozens of steps long, but we only talk about certain ones most of the time. But plugins can really tie into a lot of very fine-grained phases, like right before the files are copied or right after the compile is finished. Those are two different phases. You see what I mean? So, so plugins, they bind. That's what this binding is at the bottom. A goal. It's called a goal, and a goal is something that a plugin can accomplish. So it's actual code. It might copy some files or extract some files or compile something or encrypt something. So it's a little bit of code that a plugin needs to do as part of your build. And all of Maven's main built-in stuff happens in plugins that are also provided by Maven. So from the consumer point of view, from the developer point, it seems like it's just part of Maven, but it's really a plugin, like the deploy plugin or the compiler plugin. Mule has one, the Mule Maven plugin. It's a plugin for Maven, and that's a little package of goals. And then goals get bound to phases, and that's how the goals know when it's time for them to wake up and do something. So when you run Maven, it proceeds through a series of phases, and it runs all the goals that are bound to that phase. And so, right, this phase is done, right? And that's the life cycle we're going to see later. So, but plugins are where the actual useful stuff happens, right? Not just running things, like actually doing something. There's a dependency plugin that does all the downloading of your dependencies. Super handy to go look at all the goals in that plugin, because you can directly run goals using the Maven tool. If you're trying to actually work on the build, that can become a very handy activity. So you go look up the reference for a Maven plugin, and then you see all the goals that it has, and you can see what parameters those goals take. And then right there on the command line, you can type Maven, and then it will run that goal with your settings and give you the output, and you can see what is going on at that one little piece of your build, right? Instead of just having to run the whole build and see what happens, and oh no, it broke, right? No, I can just run that one little goal and see what it did do, right? So goals are both bound to phases, and they can be invoked directly from the command line. And the dependency plugin has a bunch of very handy goals for troubleshooting your dependencies, which sometimes is a big part of working on Maven stuff. All right, so speaking of troubleshooting your dependencies, those have to come from somewhere, right? Now, there's layers to your dependencies. So you have this thing called a local repository, which is just a directory sitting on your computer. And when you first install Maven, that directory is empty. There's nothing in it. So that is a cache. It's a dependency cache that you can also put stuff in. So if you run Maven install locally, that will copy stuff into your local repo. If you just run Maven and install and it downloads dependencies from other repositories, then those are going to be copied into your local repository. So you have this folder on your machine. It's organized into group IDs, and then inside the group IDs, it's organized into artifact IDs. And inside an artifact ID, it's organized into versions. And inside there is all the files for that dependency is in your local repository. Now, those dependencies could be either snapshot versions or release versions. Mostly, you never want to use snapshot versions at all. This is Ryan's opinion. Obviously, Maven has been designed to support snapshot versions. But the idea is a release. If it's not a snapshot version, then it is a release version. So it won't say release. It'll just say a number. And then that's a release version. So the default is if you publish a version of something, that's final. If you accidentally left a bug in there, too bad. Make a new version. That's the whole philosophy of Maven. And then people complained that there were some workflows that they wanted to work on where that's too much trouble to make a new release every time you change one line of code. I get it. Maybe it's your workflow, though. Maybe it's not Maven. And that's what the Maven maintainers were struggling with, is there's a lot of ways of working that fit together that where or have that problem. But not everybody works that way. So, Maven's a very broadly used tool, so we want to accommodate all workflows. So some folks have a workflow where you want to change a dependency very frequently during development. So they made a version of a version type called snapshot that you can actually put new versions of that in your local, and it's really meant for the local repository. You can put new snapshots in your local repository, bang, 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 all day long. And that will not require you to make up new version numbers. You can keep 1.1.3 snapshot and just keep using that. And all the different other projects that use it don't have to change their POM files. That's the trouble that it was solving. I go to all that length about snapshots because we can't even take advantage of that in MuleSoft. The main place where we would need snapshot versions is in the development of MuleSoft connectors. And Anypoint Studio and doesn't reload snapshots. So even if you do use a snapshot version, you don't get any benefits for using a snapshot version. So Mule development, I can't find any place where I would ever use a snapshot version. So it's kind of like academic. Like, yeah, we can know that there's snapshot versions in Maven, and maybe that's useful. Not in MuleSoft. There's not really any way to use snapshots. So we just use release versions for everything in our MuleSoft projects. And then that would be this local, you're on your own computer, developing libraries, developing client apps, and that's all locally on your own machine with your local repo. Then like you want to put your app, so you want to put your code out there for other people, right? So MuleSoft has Anypoint Exchange. I've got a whole slide for that. You can put your own stuff in your Anypoint Exchange, and then everybody else on your team can get it, right? And then MuleSoft can put their own stuff in two places. They have their own Anypoint Exchange, and then they have a MuleSoft releases repository, and then we can all get that stuff too. And then Maven Central, that's the whole world. That's Sonatype. That's where, if you want to make it just a Java library for the rest of the world. And MuleSoft Forge, we put our connectors in Maven Central because we can't get them into MuleSoft releases because we're not MuleSoft. Or just the community. So we put them in Maven. So when you run your build locally, you have to then, you said you can reset your modules cache. I'd have to try that. I have to try that. We used to, Tony's trying to give me a way to use snapshots. I don't like snapshots, Tony. But maybe you guys will, and then you can use, maybe I'll try it though, reset modules cache. The trouble I had, which I haven't tried reset modules cache to get over a snapshot cache, is that when you load a connector that you built, there's graphical widgets. There's like, so if I click on a connector at the bottom of the screen, it pulls up all of the little tabs on the left, and then the form fields and of all your settings for your connector, the graphical part. That's what wasn't resetting, right? So if I wanted to add another required field or turn a field not required or move something to a different tab on the graphical screen for a connector, Anypoint wasn't caring, and I would have to make a new version. So, and also another one was the metadata. The metadata would be not updated every time I updated metadata in a connector. So, I will try reset modules cache. I mean, when I'm doing connector development, it would be handy because I'm doing very frequent changes to that connector, and I want to see it in my app. But, yeah, Tony, you have a good point. Maybe I'm overdoing it with my opinions about snapshots. All right. But you guys, I want you to see the layers of repositories. They're just websites. The local repository is just a folder on your hard drive. Exchange is a website. MuleSoft releases is a website. And Maven Central is a website, right? It's literally, it's repo1.maven.org. There it is. It's just this website. It's a pretty old looking website. So if I go to com and then MuleSoft Forge, and then here's the Informatica thing, and then there's 5 versions of it, and there's my jar files, right? Like, it's just a website. You see it's public. I didn't have to log into it. It's just a website. That's each one of these little files has a cryptographic signature and everything, so that I don't know if it's accessible according. It's not meant for humans very much, Tony. That's if it's accessible. I accessed it pretty well, but I don't know if this is going to work very well for screen readers or something, if that's what you mean. But it's a website where my Maven tool can go download the dependency very easily, right? And this is Maven Central. You are looking at Maven Central. That's the layers of your, and you can see how like all the way on the right is the most global, all the way on the left is the most local, and then there's these progressively more broad scopes for these dependencies. So if I just want something to work at my company, I could put it in my exchange. If I want it to work for all of MuleSoft customers, I could put it in MuleSoft. Or if I want it to be of all Java community, then it would be Maven Central. And it's progressively harder. Actually, for me, it's easier to get to Maven Central than MuleSoft releases because I don't work at MuleSoft. But if I did work at MuleSoft, 3 would be easier, right? Yeah, it's a Maven interface. Yeah, that's the next slide. So Tony just said Anypoint Exchange only partially mimics a Maven repo. Exchange is an asset catalog. It's a website. It's a very full-featured user interface and it's browsable by Anypoint Studio also for the distribution of MuleSoft-related software in your company. But it exposes a Maven interface so Maven can browse Exchange. That said, there is a group ID, which I put this at the bottom of the slide that Suma asked about. So in order to publish assets in my Anypoint Exchange, they have to be published to a particular business group. And business groups have IDs. I might have to log in here to the integration quest one because we have a bunch of different business groups. Come on. Salesforce Authenticator. You know, in class, this happens to me a lot, and then I just have to do this. So let's do it that way. Which one of these is it? There it is. All right, we are in. All right, so I have these business groups in my org, right? And if I go to my access management app, you can go to the screen where you make all the business groups, and any one of these business groups is going to have a business group ID. When you publish things into Anypoint Exchange, then they have to go in that business group ID. So that would be the group ID of the asset you want to publish. It would be go to that business group. So if I want it to appear in any one of my business groups in my org, the group ID has to match that number, and then whatever account I'm using to publish has to have Exchange contributor access to that org. So that's how MuleSoft organizes it. That means that's all the only group IDs that work in Anypoint Exchange are group IDs that look like this. They don't say edu.brown or quest.integration. They don't say words. They have to say this one of these GUIDs that you get from MuleSoft. And if you try to publish to the wrong one, you will not get you'll get denied. You will not have access to do that. So that's how Exchange exposes stuff. You can authenticate Maven with credentials in your settings.xml. At least one way I used to do user credentials no longer works. They turned it off in Exchange. Connected app definitely still works. And there's a special syntax for authenticating as a connected app. And so that's what I always use now. But I have had rumors, and I haven't tried it myself, that there is still a way to do user authentication in settings.xml. I think some kind of a token thing where you have to go refresh an OAuth token and then use that. I just haven't done that. I like the connected app because it's a long-lived credential that I can have in my settings.xml and just be able to publish stuff into my Exchange. You publish with the word deploy, not publish. And this is a tricky one that if you don't pay attention will confuse you. Maven deploy does not deploy anything to Runtime Manager. Maven deploy publishes assets to Exchange only. Yeah. And then you with Exchange, there's more to it. There's an asset type, which in Maven dependency language would be a classifier. And that would be a plugin or a policy, or you could publish an application. Of course, you have to for Cloud Hub 2 deployments. Exchange does support snapshot dependencies, and it treats them like snapshots, so you can overwrite them. And I can't think of any shade to throw about snapshots at this point. So lucky Tony. And then but the nice thing about putting an asset in Exchange is if it's the right kind of asset, then you'll be able to actually see it in the rest of the Anypoint toolchain, like in the IDE and stuff. So that's pretty handy. Maven plugin, the Mule Maven plugin does all of that publishing stuff and deployments to various runtime targets. Cloud, and I got a slide for that too. There's a bunch of different MuleSoft published Maven plugins. So MUnit has one, and that's just for running MUnit tests. And there's an Exchange Maven plugin for much more flexible asset publishing, not just for Mule applications, but for all kinds of assets. And then there's an Extensions Maven plugin, which knows how to build connectors, which is pretty handy. I actually think there's another one. I was proofreading my slides right before this, and I think I forgot one. So let me go see if I'm wrong, if it's one of those four. DataWeave libraries use, there's a DataWeave Maven plugin. So I did forget one. DataWeave has its own Maven plugin. So MuleSoft publishes a collection of different plugins for working on building and publishing different kinds of projects to Anypoint Exchange. Or other, I guess MUnit doesn't do that. MUnit runs tests, right? Extensions builds extensions. So they have their kind of their own role in the Maven lifecycle. Let's do the Maven lifecycle. This is not MuleSoft. This is Maven. Maven's lifecycle is a series of linear steps. It is not designed to be conditional. Like there's no flowchart. There's no if-then complexity. It's always a linear series of steps, and the build will go as far as it can, and as soon as it fails, it stops there. So however, what you do when you run Maven is you choose a lifecycle phase that you would like to achieve, and it treats that as a goal, and it executes all the prior stages one by one until you get to the one you picked. And then if you get that far, you get a successful build. So that's part of how you launch and run Maven. Maven then moves through the it begins in the validate phase and runs all the plugins that are bound on your project, and then it goes to the compile phase and it runs all the plugins that are in your project. And there's a bunch of little fine-grained phases in between those two, process resources and stuff. You'll see those in your build sometimes, so I want you to be aware what they're for. Maven actually has a lot more phases. They're just not usually meant for us to type into the command line, even though you can. There's a smaller list like I have on the slide that are meant for us to use interactively, and then there's a bunch of other ones that are kind of just used to manage getting from phase to phase. But plugins can bind anywhere. They can bind to those fine-grained phases if they want to. Also, as soon as you reach the compile phase, you have already resolved all your dependencies. So that's a good way to make sure that your dependencies are in good shape. I have a bug on my slide. I'm just going to take this out. There is no compiling DataWeave sources, so I fixed that there. Good. Yeah, and then it'll go from phase to phase. It'll run your MUnit during the test phase. Yeah, I don't have install in there either. I kind of, you know what? I'm going to put install here. That's a better one to list there. Thank you for that, Suma. Nobody runs verify. Yeah. So as you move past the package phase, that's when you finally escape outside the directory you're in. So package phase is still local, it's still in the project under the target directory, and then install. Now you're copying things to your local repository. Deploy. Now you're uploading things over the network, like that. Good. When you launch Maven, you can provide configurations for the build. Yeah, that's what I think. Okay, so Maven deploy versus Maven install. Question in the chat. Yeah, install is less than deploy, but deploy includes install. Install means take the project that I built and go put it in my local repository so that other projects on the same computer can use it. Right. Deploy means take the project that I built, upload it to a Maven repository somewhere on a different computer, so then other people on other computers can use it. So it's a broader goal, right? So you might put it in Exchange, and then your whole team can use it. Install will just be here. Deploy will be up there. That's the difference between those. And then when you run profile or properties, those are used so that your current build can have settings. Things I use for that might be, I might need when I'm building a connector for MuleSoft Forge, I have to provide my GPG private key so that Maven can sign all of the jar files before they get uploaded. So I don't want that in the POM file, right? It's private. Right. So I have to provide that in a profile that reads properties, right? So that way the build doesn't include the secret, but it can use the secret when it's running. So you provide profile activation and properties, and that's a way to have kind of like ephemeral config that you're giving to the build just for this run and not for every run. And that's through profiles and properties. Mule deployment with Maven is one of the two ways. It's not even my favorite way. I rather use Anypoint CLI. However, it is a very effective and popular way to deploy Mule applications without having to click around in Runtime Manager. So I can set up a Maven plugin configuration, and I put a bunch of property values in there, and that can give the build my connected app credentials. So then we can deploy this application to Cloud Hub 2.0 in a particular environment, or a runtime fabric, or a standalone server. We're capable of deploying the app and running it for real, including runtime manager settings, like how many workers and how our replicas and how large they are, and the settings in the runtime manager settings screen. There's a whole bunch of little settings at deployment time, and those can be specified in configuration properties of the Maven plugin. And you can include some of that directly in the Maven plugin. You can some of that in your settings.xml, some of that in your profiles. You can design how much of that deployment information belongs as a fixed project code, or as a value that gets determined each time that you do a build. And I use profiles and settings for that. Like, is this going to deploy to QA or dev or something like that? Or so you might have settings that are meant to be different each time. When the tests run, the munit Maven plugin, it picks up all the tests at a source test munit, and it can use your settings and profiles to pick up values that those tests need in case you want to use integration tests instead of unit tests. And it'll generate a report of the test results. It'll generate a coverage report of how much of your code was hit by tests, and you can have a setting for how much of your code has to be covered by tests before it gets deployed. And then there's an evil flag. It's on the slide. Anybody see the evil flag? Yeah, you got it, Amrit. I bet you get my opinion about that flag. When you're lazy, remember Ryan called it lazy. Your build isn't working. You really need to hurry up and get done. You could just skip unit tests and deploy it. People get into the habit too much of just always skipping tests when they're running Maven, because I already ran them in Anypoint Studio or something like that. Resist the urge to use the evil flag. You got me on YouTube saying that. All right. Cool. So that's pretty much what I prepared as a lesson about Maven. I kind of pulled together some of our development class materials and our architecture class materials. Main takeaways about Maven is that there's two places to put your Maven instructions. Some of it goes in the POM file, which is project by project. Some of it goes in your settings file, which is machine by machine. And keeping track of those two is part of the things to watch for when you use Maven. There is a very helpful Maven plugin. I didn't put on a slide now. I should have done so. The Maven Help plugin will tell you what your POM and your settings are actually seeing, not just what you think they're seeing. So it's called the Maven Help plugin. And it has look at all these goals. So when you want to run a plugin's goals, you type MVN space and exactly this: help active profiles, help all profiles, help effective POM, help effective settings. right? Evaluate Maven expressions. So when you're trying to troubleshoot your build, you want to be able to ask Maven, because you're going on an assumption that, hey, I already get, these are my dependencies, or these are my repositories. But remember, I've got a POM with a parent POM, and I've got a settings file, and all of these inputs are being used by Maven when it runs. This plugin allows you to find out what is Maven really seeing. I am a big fan of facts. Tony said it's good to have goals. I say it's good to have facts. The help plugin gets you facts, right? So it'll get you exactly what Maven sees when it's running from your POM file and from your settings. No, real facts, no alternative facts. All right. Another one that'll get you is authentication. So when Maven is pulling dependencies out of Exchange, it needs to be authenticated to Exchange. That authentication can expire, because it could be token based in Anypoint Studio, for example. So it might expire. And then Maven will remember that it failed to get a dependency with a 401 authenticated code. And then it'll remember that for 24 hours. So even if you fix your settings and rerun it, it still won't be fixed because it remembers that it failed. So then you have to use a special setting -u or wipe out a folder in your repository or something. You got to get Maven to forget that it failed on a certain dependency after you fix the authentication with Exchange. And you want to troubleshoot your Exchange authentication because you might be assuming that it's good and it's actually not good, because maybe you think it's using Anypoint Studio, but it's actually using your settings XML. So I just told you about that plugin. That's the help plugin. So the idea of Maven, the one that I put in orange here, is that it's the same command when I build it on my machine and when you build it on your machine and when the robots build it in the cloud, like GitHub Actions or something. That's what we're after, right? Because we don't want the build to be a source of variation on our team. For team development, it's a big benefit to have one way that we do our build for everybody. And Maven does that for us. So that's what I got as my takeaway. That's what I got from my whole study group presentation. And I got time left for study group discussion and chit chat. Anybody want to? All right, I got one. Let's pull that back up. Yeah, you're welcome. Does Anypoint Code Builder fall short when compared to Anypoint Studio in terms of any Maven-related capability? The IDE is expected to be agnostic to the build and independent of it, but I know if there's any hidden gotchas, I will say it's superior for data weave projects. So at least that is not in Anypoint Studio, and they're never going to put it there. So I always use Code Builder at least for data weave, because data weave projects are just better. Like they have a playground just there, right? And then when it comes to Mule projects, I wonder if I have any recently opened. I mostly don't. That's a Salesforce project. That's a Python project. I'd have to go hunting. Last time I checked, Code Builder couldn't do domain projects. So if you're on-prem, I'm stuck in Studio for domain projects, but maybe they fixed that. And then for running Maven, Code Builder just has this nice little terminal, and Studio doesn't have one. So I guess I can only report my personal experience of just dropping to the terminal and running Maven, and it's easy in Code Builder. But maybe someone else has a more IDE integrated answer to Bera. So I'm going to read it out loud if anybody wants to answer your own experience with Code Builder. Does Anypoint Code Builder fall short when compared to Studio in terms of any Maven-related capabilities? Right? Does anybody have their own? Maybe some of you have tried it more with Maven. Or if not, man, I don't know. MuleSoft seems to think everybody's moving over to ACB, and I'm wondering, are you guys all just staying in Studio? Is that what's happening? Or are you guys whose daily driver is nobody's daily driver is ACB? I don't know. Maybe we're all just old. Yeah, Amrit's right. Vibes is in. I haven't really gotten into vibes yet either. Yeah. Yeah. Everybody on prem still does. Yeah. Everybody likes it. All right. I'm going to go to the next one. Thank you, Suma. Thanks, Tony. All right. Is it possible to encrypt data in a pom.xml profile for each environment instead of using secure.yaml? You don't want to do that. If so, which approach is better, build time or runtime security? Are there any good use cases? All right, Sung-Young, that's an advanced question, and it's not. Let's see if I can even. Wonder if I can do this. See, I was restyling a different lesson, and then I redid it all in this. Let me go back to my old one. It's going to be ugly. We don't mind ugly. You're asking more of a CI/CD type of a. So I don't know if you knew you were asking that, because you can do environment-based secure builds in your build. I think the industry standard is not to do it in the build, but to do it at runtime. So pick up environment stuff down here instead of up here. However, I'm not, that's not universal. Some people try to do it earlier. And then even so, you can do it. You can provide a secret at the time something is moving into the environment rather than in the box, right? So it's generally a MuleSoft community standard that whatever gets deployed to dev is exactly the same binary that gets deployed to QA and then UAT and then prod. That's the convention, and I feel like it's a pretty healthy convention. I'm used to doing it that way. I'm not saying it's bad if you've. I'm not saying there's no way to make it work where you change binaries per environment. It just seems uncommon, right? So the way we do the way we do secrets in my preferred design is we get them as late as possible. So if I can get a secret only right when I need to make a call, I'll do it that way. If the best I can do is the time that I deploy the software, I'll do it that way. The earlier I go in the supply chain, the less I don't want secrets in my source control, right? Right. I would rather have them later. And then if I have to put them in here in my build, that's better than source control, but not as good as if I get the secrets here. The later, the better, in my opinion, right? For putting secrets in. And all of these are meant for you guys to argue and share, right? So if anybody have their own secrets opinion, that's a good time to do that one. Bera is having a hard time getting used to the vertical UI flow in ACB. I heard a rumor, Bera, that they're exploring making a toggle so that you could switch to horizontal. I hope they do, right? Because then we could, if they do that, we could see multiple flows on the same screen. Which the vertical view, the thing that bugs me the most is I can only see one flow at a time, and I have to select which flow I'm looking at. I want to look at more than one flow sometimes. So, yeah, for sure. And then Tony says, back in Mule. Oh, we got a Mule 3 story. Back in Mule 3. I hacked the Mule Maven plugin to inject a user-specified folder structure in the final jar file for the purpose of creating environment-specific jar files. Oh, that's sad. Don't do that, Tony. Black magic. I did some Mule 3 hacking to combine. Somebody wanted to deploy. They wanted to have separate Mule projects, but combine them together to put them on Cloud Hub. So I built that, and I regret it. That was a bad move. I don't know if yours was meant as a confession. It was probably an engineering marvel. It's cool to make powerful stuff. Vertical UI is inspired from Salesforce flows. I hate it filling up the whole screen. It's like one flow does not need to fill up the screen. The graphic design in Anypoint Studio, it looks basic, but some people thought about it for decades. How do I make I was doing an example in my architecture class the other day. Do I have it up? It's been so long. Where's Anypoint Studio? Here. Yeah. No, this isn't it. Like this loop here. Or I think we did one with first successful. Where's my first successful? Round robin. Yeah, these routers in Mule in ACB. I'm glad I'm not a graphic designer because it's a hard problem. A round robin, each one of these branches turns into a vertical branch going down. And so it ends up filling up so much screen space when you finally do one of these round robin or first successfuls. And somebody figured it out in Studio where it basically works, and you can still collapse the flow if you want to make it small. They don't have that in Code Builder, so yeah. Well, all right. You with us, Caston? I think we have done all of the prepared content, and we can tell people all about the study group.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you guys for joining us today with Ryan and our discussion on Maven. Let me share my screen.
Do you know what next week's study group is? Let me look.
Next week's study group is going to be with Diane. The topic is to be determined. So keep an eye out for Diane's.
We'll be announcing it in a day.
Or
Or send
that right out
requests.
to you.
If she doesn't want to announce the topic, you guys should send requests. Make it tough. Come on.
Right, exactly. I love it. And if you're interested in any of our previous study groups or anything like that, you can always visit us at on YouTube, on our Integration Quest YouTube, as well as we have them all on Kajabi as well. And I want to say thank you, everyone, for coming in. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now.